All right, I think we're live. And just an update. As you can tell by the title, the most of you probably know FEMA has declared the city a natural disaster area. And kind of like California, whenever they have one of these wildfires that goes bonkers and starts sweeping over a huge amount of acreage. Only, unlike in those cases where you can just leave, you can take your car and move somewhere else. Doing that here only spreads the disease to other places. And in fact, it was kind of interesting. I was reading something online about what's happening in this city in Idaho, which is kind of a resort for very wealthy people, foreign foreign businessmen and celebrities, and it's become a hive for the Wuhan flu. This virus, it's just blossomed, and they don't have the medical equipment to deal with it since it's primarily it's a small town in Idaho. It's designed to entertain tourists and care for the small local population, but it's not designed to deal with a pandemic. So they're having issues, not maybe not as big as the issues that New York is having. So far, there are over 10,000 people that have been diagnosed, although I'm sure it's much larger than that. I think over 200 people in Staten Island alone, probably more than that. Uh, According to reports, hi Roxby. Well, the disaster designation, it just means the federal government can allocate more funds. So there's already a hospital ship docked in New York Harbor, but this is just going to release billions of dollars. Cuomo was discussing this, the fact that there were, I forget the figure. I think he said there were 6,000 PNW. He said there were 6,000 ventilators on the market, but that New York might need 30,000. So that's not good. I was looking at some of the reports that said that Kings County Hospital, which is a level one trauma center, for those of you who've been to Brooklyn, Kings County is kind of like one of the main treatment centers. I think they treat somewhere between half a million and 800,000 people. There are 2.5 million people living in Brooklyn. So Kings County is one of the major hospitals in the borough and in New York City. And there are reports that they have the medical staff there they're reusing masks. They're disinfecting them, but they're using the same masks, which is kind of reminiscent of what's been going on in Italy and kind of disturbing. There are also there are also thousands of people online at these testing clinics that are about a half a dozen of them open, but these might actually be spreading the virus because you have people who are sick and some people who are not sick just simply standing in line to get tested instead of staying at home and trying to recuperate or recover. Uh, there's a former acquaintance of mine who was describing this on Twitter, how he had symptoms that mimic pneumonia, and what he did in order to treat himself while he was homebound. But there are a bunch of people just standing in line waiting to get tested and potentially spreading this and causing more hospital beds and more ventilators to be used. Like Kings County, I think only has 700 hospital beds, and like I said, there are 10,000 people in New York City who confirmed cases, and probably, assuming there's going to be more at tomorrow night, they're going to start enforcing new measures to ban any sort of public gathering, not just these gatherings, these large gatherings. They've had these Hasidic weddings where you've had hundreds of people, and the police have broken those up. But starting tomorrow, they're just going to break up any sort of gathering of, you know, any public gathering that they say. They're going to disperse it. So that's going to start happening tomorrow. People are going to be able to leave their house for exercise if they don't get within, I forget what it is, 6 feet of other people. Which, I mean, usually in New York, it's very difficult to avoid. I mean, in Staten Island, it's possible, but like in other parts of the city, it's not really possible to avoid standing 6 feet to avoid to distance yourself. But now the streets are large part abandoned, but there are other places like Brooklyn. Apparently, people are still running around Prospect Park. They're still jogging. There's still people in Sunset Park playing basketball, which is kind of nuts. But apparently, they're not deterred. But presumably, those are going to be, the governor's going to put an end to them. Yeah, that's true. There's no personal space at all, particularly if you go to places like, I mean, if you're in Manhattan, it's such a densely packed pocket of land. I mean, if you're walking around Grand Street or Canal Street, if you're going around Chinatown or Midtown Manhattan, or even a neighborhood like Gramercy or the Flatiron, you're you're brushing up against dozens, well, hundreds of people. And Brooklyn, I mean, Brooklyn. There are a lot of people in Brooklyn. There are like I said, there are 2.5 million people, and there are really crowded areas there. Although, I mean, places like Park Slope or downtown Brooklyn, where you have things like the Atlantic, the Barclays Center, where the Nets play and the Islanders played briefly. But you have these areas. Yeah, it's hard to avoid. It's hard to avoid breathing on someone in New York City. I mean, like I said, there are places in Staten Island and certain parts of the Bronx, but in other areas, places like Jackson Heights or Manhattan, Chinatown, Sunset Park, it's hard to avoid running into people. I remember I went as part of Operation Samaria last year. I went out with a group from my church, and we walked from, I think, 56th Street. There's this huge Roman Catholic cathedral, and I think we got out of the van there and we walked all the way to Sunset Park, handing out tracts. And then we had a pastor visiting from Leon, Mexico, who was actually preaching in Spanish. Yeah, Yankees. That's another thing. Depending on when you're on the subway or the ferry, you're surrounded by people coming back or going to Yankees games or Rangers games at Madison Square Garden. Not so much Knicks, even though there's still a lot of people that, well, not now, but there are a lot of people that go to Knicks games at Madison Square Garden. But yeah, you're surrounded by people coming to and from sporting events or to and from Broadway. If you're on the train, that's why these pictures of the trains where you see people, basically one or two people sitting 5 feet apart on a subway car. You usually don't see that in New York City unless it's after, if it's after 2 a.m. or 3 a.m., you might see that, but you never see that on a subway car in New York City on a normal day. And this is during rush hour, which shows you how empty the trains are. I think I mentioned in the last video, but I think the Metro North is down. The ridership is down by 80%, 70 or 80%, and the Long Island Railroad is down by 60%. I think it might not be as drastic for the MTA, but I think it's down by more than half. You see these empty subway cars. It's really remarkable. Someone posted a picture the other day. Uh, I think it was Reuters. Reuters uploaded this photo of a ballerina wearing a surgical mask in the middle of Times Square, and it was completely empty. And you even after midnight, if you're walking around Times Square, it's not as crowded, but you still see hundreds of people just walking around. I mean, you have much more space, but because most of the people have gone home, but it's still it's still relatively vibrant. You still see tourists, people taking pictures, people sitting on those terrible piazzas, these stupid pedestrian plazas that former Mayor Bloomberg and Janet Sadiq Khan created to try to end tra- traffic, to basically ban cars from the middle of Manhattan. And it's ironic, the people who complain continually about traffic and pollution and congestion, they they I mean, there's not that much to complain about now because there's no one, particularly in Manhattan, there's no one driving or very few people driving. There's no one walking around. I mean, well, they've suspended alternate side of the street parking, but I was going to say this would be the perfect time for you to find a parking space if you wanted to drive into the middle of Manhattan. You could probably park if they hadn't walled off, huge streets. You could probably drive up to Times Square and park in the middle. But yeah, New York is generally just an incredibly congested, crowded city. That's why it's sort of this petri dish for infectious diseases and communicable diseases, and why it spreads so rapidly because you have these people packed in together. Although, to be fair, if the people had been wearing surgical masks like they do in Hong Kong or Singapore or Taiwan, some of these effects might have been mitigated a little bit. Yeah, there are a lot of people at the parks. I mean, I did not see it firsthand, but I was actually paying attention to some of my friends who on social media. They posted pictures of people just walking around jogging, pretty substantial numbers in Prospect Park. Apparently, there are people in Sunset Park just playing basketball, which is kind of nuts when you think about it. I mean, it's basically a contact sport. You're breathing in someone's face for 20 minutes or half hour, but there are people doing that. There are crowds. I assume it's not as crowded as it usually is. I mean, Prospect Park, you usually have thousands of people walking around. I'm assuming it's not that crowded, but there's still people obviously just going around about their daily business, or maybe taking advantage of the fact that so many people have left, have kind of are sheltering inside. And it's just really strange. It's curious what's going to happen now, because on Sunday, like I said, at 8 p.m., they're going to start enforcing these basically curfews. I mean, the governor says it's not a shelter-in-place order, but you're basically not going to be able to socialize, to go outside. So these people, hi, Miss Bluebird, hi, Andrea. These people who are just going around doing what they would ordinarily do are going to be stopped from doing that. One of the interesting things is that they've closed barbershops, they've closed non-essential businesses. I always have a problem when the government declares something, when you're relying on the government to decide what is and is not essential business. I mean, really they're not the best source to make that outcome. They're they're not really in a great position to make that outcome. And you see what happens when they actually do that during the New Deal, where the government actually tried to manage the economy, and it resulted in the depression, or it resulted in a very large recession being turning into a Great Depression and prolonging that all the way up through World War II. And the economy did not recover until after the war. There was a lower unemployment rate just because all of the men were sent overseas, tens of millions of them, and women were replaced them in the workforce. But it was basically as a result of rationing, not economic growth. So I always have an issue when the government is the one deciding what is and is not essential business. Apparently, they've labeled liquor stores and essential business, and I don't know how they came to that conclusion. How they decided the liquor stores and not another business that people have that supports them economically. That is non-essential. But I I was really curious when I was thinking about this. I was wondering if this applies to the government. So if you have government workers that are, uh, you know, ti- Title IX compliance officers, or human resources officers, or officials, are they going to be deemed non-essential, or are they going to be allowed to continue working? It's kind of an interesting question. Yeah, the businesses. I know one of my brother's friends, I think, just got. I don't know if he was fired or late. I don't know if he was fired or laid off, but he just lost his job. I have other friends who are now working from home. A lot of these businesses they're trying to get their employees to work remotely, but in a lot of cases that's impossible. I mean, if you have to deliver food to people, there's no way you can do that via Skype, or you can't teleconference an order of a delivery pizza to someone. You actually need people who are employees. And I think it's really going to be interesting to see how this affects the economy, because California has essentially shuttered its economy. The entire state. Gavin Newsom has said it's basically closed for business, and California is they always like to brag about the fact that they're the eighth largest. I forget if it's the eighth or the ninth largest economy if it was a separate nation, and that's gone. And now New York as well. Aside from grocery stores, I think hardware stores are also exempt. So if people need to make home repairs in New York, they can do that. But otherwise, yeah, it's pretty much closed for business. I mean, the National Guard, and people are posting videos of that. The National Guard has come in. They were already in New Rochelle, but I think now they've made their way into the city. That's like about an hour away from New York City. It's upstate. It's one of the first big cities you hit, big relatively, once you start going upstate. But yes, small businesses are going to be really affected, and as far as I know, they're not going to get a gigantic bailout like the airlines. But anyway, that's just an update on what's happening in New York City. Thanks everyone for tuning in. which could have brought uh, some less grim news, but you know, it's it's still it's still looking pretty grim. But I will see you on the next stream. Thanks, everyone. Bye.